It's March 19th, 2025. Kanzi, a 44-year-old bonobo, has just died. The news hits hard. I've always felt a connection to Kanzi. I often talk about him when I teach. He's in our textbooks. We've just lost one of the most important primates that ever lived.
Lemonade.
Today I want to tell Kanzi's story, one rooted in a history of pseudoscience, of false hope, discovery, and betrayal. A story that has made me question what it means to be human. Kanzi was the first and maybe the last ape to do something that no other animal has ever done, to learn language the way humans do. And it's all because of Kanzi's unique relationship with a human scientist, a woman named Savage-Rumbaugh. I want to show how this relationship that led Kanzi to language also unlocked his mind, giving him abilities to do things only humans have ever been able to do, to make tools, to create art, to understand the minds of others. This is Kanzi's story. Kanzi's story starts in Nagoya, Japan, 1974. Scientists have convened for the world's largest symposium on primatology. Rumbaugh has come from one of the largest and oldest primate research labs in the United States to talk about a new project, teaching apes to communicate using symbols. Also at this symposium is a graduate student from Oklahoma named Sue Savage. She's come to talk about the behavior of chimpanzees raised by humans. Dwayne and Sue meet here for the first time. Something immediately clicks. 6 months later, Dwayne asks Sue to move to Atlanta. His lab at Georgia State University is about to receive some bonobos. At the time, bonobo research was in its infancy. The study of wild bonobos in Zaire had just begun. Most zoos had no idea the bonobos were their own species. They still considered them pygmy chimpanzees. Humans share 98.8% of our DNA with chimps and bonobos. Studying them tells us about ourselves, about where we came from and how we got here. And if there's one question that nags at me day and night, it's about the origin of our most human trait, the one thing that, according to linguists, sets us apart from every other living thing on Earth: language. 2 years after their chance meeting, Dwayne and Sue are married. From their partnership, a shared goal has come into focus, a goal that will lead to an identity crisis for what it means to be human. They want to give the gift of language to apes. Ape language research starts in 1948 with an offbeat idea. Keith and Catherine Hayes have just adopted an infant chimpanzee, and they're raising her as though she were their own child. Her name is Vicky. She lives with the Hayes, wearing baby clothes and eating at their dinner table. And they talk to her like a human baby. They want Vicky to be the first ape to speak. But even with intensive speech training, she only ever manages to utter 3 words.
Vicky, say mama. Get it. Mama. Who am I? Papa? Can you say what this is?
Chimpanzees just aren't built for this. According to linguists like Noam Chomsky, we learn language automatically because we have universal grammar. Our brains are hardwired to learn language. Chomsky is adamant: no animal is ever going to master human language. In 1966, another family, Alan and Beatrice Gardner, adopt their own baby chimpanzee. They name her Washoe, after Washoe County, home of the University of Nevada. They realize that no ape is ever going to learn how to speak, but they might learn how to gesture. They decide to teach Washoe sign language. It was rough going. Washoe needed hundreds of repetitions to learn even a single word. It took 16 months for her to begin imitating gestures on command. But once she starts, her learning begins to accelerate. One day, out of the pond with Gardner's grad student Roger Fouts, Washoe sees a swan. She had never learned a sign for this. It was the first time she had even seen one. She immediately signs water and bird. This is huge. It's the first case of a primate combining 2 words to create a new meaning. Herb Terrace, a psychologist at Columbia University, hears about Washoe. He's impressed. Terrace wants to prove Noam Chomsky wrong. Language isn't purely in the domain of humans. With the right training, animals can learn it too. Terrace finds his own baby chimp and sends it to live with his graduate student, Stephanie Lafarge, and her 7 children. Terrace names the chimpanzee Nim Chimpsky. Nim had an unconventional life even by the standards of the time. It was a chaotic house with 7 kids and a chimpanzee. Lafarge tried to breastfeed him but didn't produce any milk. To relax, they smoked pot together. But it seemed to be working. Nim was learning words and even sentence structure. The ape language revolution was in full swing. Chomsky was wrong. At the same time, Stanford grad student Penny Patterson is training an infant gorilla named Coco. In the first 30 months, Coco learns 100 words in American Sign Language. She spontaneously generates novel sentences up to 11 words long and even invents her own signs for new objects. In 1978, Patterson tells the world, "Language is no longer the exclusive domain of man." The celebration was premature. Soon after Penny Patterson reveals her work with Coco, Herb Terrace decides to revisit his data. He analyzes 19,000 of Nim's utterances looking for any kind of pattern. But instead, he finds a problem that derails the entire ape language movement. Something called the Clever Hans effect. In Germany, back in 1907, there was a horse named Hans. Clever Hans. Clever Hans could add, subtract, multiply, divide, calculate fractions, tell time, read, spell, and of course, understand German. Clever Hans and his owner, Wilhelm von Orsten, traveled across the country showing off Hans's amazing abilities free of charge. The demonstrations went like this. A spectator from the crowd would ask Hans a question.
11 plus 7. 11 plus 7.
Then, to everyone's astonishment, Hans would tap his hoof exactly 18 times. It wasn't until Clever Hans was systematically tested that the trick was revealed, a trick not even Wilhelm was aware of. Clever Hans could answer any question as long as the person asking already knew the answer and was in Hans' line of sight. It turned out that as Clever Hans approached the correct number of hoof taps, the spectator's body language would shift ever so slightly. Clever Hans really was clever. He could pick up on these tiny shifts in body language, posture, and facial expression to know exactly when to stop tapping. No one had any idea they were actually giving Hans the answers. It was a simple trick, but the only one in on it was Clever Hans himself. When Herb Terrace scours the video footage of Nim Chimpsky frame by frame, he discovers this same trick. Nim is not initiating conversation. 90% of Nim's gestures are in response to gestures from his teachers. Half of Nim's gestures are imitations of what a teacher had just signed. Without realizing it, Nim's human teachers had been subconsciously cueing him. And when Terrace analyzes video of the other signing apes, he finds the same thing. It really is just all mimicry. It's a circus act. The longest sentence ever signed by Nim was 16 words long. The problem is that it really didn't have any structure. Give orange me, give eat orange, me eat orange, give me eat orange, give me you. There was no evidence that Nim had ever combined symbols to create new meanings. Terrace was forced to conclude that Noam Chomsky had been right all along. Language belongs to man. The effects of this revelation on ape language research were immediate. Funding disappeared. Projects were scuttled. It was over. Neuroanatomical and Sue Savage have one last shot to salvage the ape language program at Georgia State. By a stroke of luck, they had managed to secure 5 years' worth of funding just before Terrace set the whole field into disarray. They've just obtained a female bonobo named Matata. They are ready to begin. Matata was going to learn a symbolic language that used graphical symbols, called lexicograms, arranged in a grid. Researchers would say an English word and point to the board to help Matata associate the word with the symbol. Once she had the symbols down, they would be able to communicate. But for the next 2 years, they made very little progress. Matata just wasn't learning. The gamble had failed. Before she had come to Atlanta, Matata had adopted a baby named Kanzi and kept him as her own son. Now, while Matata was trying to learn, he jumped on her head, stole her treats, and generally acted like a 6-month-old bonobo. 2 years into the project, Matata was briefly sent to another lab. Kanzi was distraught. He searched for his mother everywhere. He didn't know where she had gone. But then he did something that no one had anticipated. He went to the lexigram board and touched the symbols for raisin and peanut. He was asking for treats. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh was in a state of disbelief. Kanzi had received no training. They hadn't paid any attention to him at all, and even though his mother had learned almost nothing, Kanzi had secretly been learning the whole time. Kanzi had fundamentally changed the direction of the field. By 1985, Kanzi had two new sisters, Mulika and Bandini, and they were both showing the same incredible learning as Kanzi. The bonobos were picking up new words by being spoken to during feeding, playing, and grooming, and even watching television. Before long, it became clear that Kanzi could understand hundreds of sentences he'd never heard before. And the bonobos were even using language creatively, combining words in new ways to make new expressions. One day, while testing Kanzi, Sue tells him to put water on a carrot. In response, Kanzi throws the carrot outdoors. Sue repeats her instructions thinking Kanzi has misunderstood, but Kanzi protests. He points vigorously towards the open door. Outside, it's raining. But the real test was to compare Kanzi to a human child. Sue decides to pit Kanzi against a 2-year-old named Aaliyah. Aaliyah's mother works in the lab, so Aaliyah has spent half her time there with Kanzi. She's used the lexigram keyboard with her mother almost since birth, just like Kanzi. Sue makes Kanzi and Aaliyah answer questions and commands like, could you take the pine needles outside? And go outdoors and get the pine needles. Or make the doggy bite the snake versus make the snake bite the doggy. This is tough because these sentences are very similar, but they mean very different things. They're tested on hundreds of sentences. Kanzi answers 74% of them correctly. Aaliyah responds accurately to 65%. Kanzi is at least as language capable as a 2-year-old human child.
All right. Kanzi, see if you can find mushrooms. Mushrooms. That's right, those are the mushrooms. Real good. Can you turn back around?
It was almost too good to be true. Sue had to make sure she wasn't falling victim to a clever Hans effect. She devises elaborate procedures. She talks to Kanzi while wearing a welding mask so he can't see her face.
Put the key in the refrigerator. Good job. Thank you. Very nice.
She tests Kanzi while sitting in another room, giving him instructions over headphones.
Kanzi, give Sue bananas. That's right.
Kanzi is no clever Hans. This is the real deal. Human children are natural language learners. They learn with very little effort. They don't require direct teaching or reinforcement. And according to Chomsky, they come pre-wired with universal grammar. Humans have a critical period for learning language. If you miss that window, you may never fully acquire it. Sue wondered whether this was the key to Kanzi's success. After all, he had been exposed to lexigrams since he was 6 months old. She decides to test whether bonobos have a critical period for learning the way human children do. Luckily, she has the perfect natural experiment. Kanzi's sister Bandini had been exposed to lexigrams when she was 7 weeks old. Another bonobo in the lab, Tamuli, had only been exposed to language when she was 3.5 years old. Bandini's language skills rivaled Kanzi's, but Tamuli never passed any comprehension tests. She just didn't get it. She was past her critical period.
Melon and sweet potato. I heard you say melon and sweet potato. That was very nice.
Sue shifts her focus to Kanzi's vocalizations. This is an overlooked ability. Most researchers have fixated on teaching the apes, but they don't necessarily consider what the apes can already do.
I will go and look for you right
Sue analyzes hundreds of hours of video footage, paying close attention to the sounds Kanzi makes when he uses the lexigram board. A phonetic analysis shows that Kanzi's high-pitched vocalizations, which are hard for humans to discriminate, actually correspond to different categories of lexigrams. Kanzi isn't just manipulating visual symbols, he's talking. He's creating his own spoken words. Kanzi and Bandini are learning more than language. The symbol system is unlocking something else. One day, Bandini uses the lexigrams to warn Kanzi about a nearby snake. Kanzi jolts. He's searching for a snake, but there's nothing in sight. Bandini is using language to deceive. She's playing a prank. The bonobos are displaying a new human skill, the ability to read another person's mind, to figure out what they're thinking. This is a skill that takes human children years to perfect. One of the last studies published with Kanzi before he died tested this theory of mind. Kanzi, Nyota, and Tico had to help unwitting human partners find food hidden under several cups. If their partner knew where the food was, they didn't feel the need to help too much. But when the human was ignorant, they kicked into action, guiding them to the correct hiding place. The bonobos are seeing the world from another person's perspective, to understand what the other person knows and what they don't know, just like humans do. It's 2001. Sue gets a phone call from a man in Iowa. His name is Ted Townsend, and he wants to meet Kanzi. When he arrives at the lab, Kanzi sees him and gestures to the woods. He wants to play a game of chase. After the game, Kanzi goes to the lexigram board and points to the symbol for juice. Townsend gives him a bottle and Kanzi presses the button for thank you. Townsend is in disbelief. This was not supposed to be possible. My world changed, he says. He has a proposal, a new facility. The lab in Atlanta is fine, but the bonobos deserve more. Ted wants to build a $10 million compound sitting on 230 acres of woodland. The compound will have a 13,000 square foot laboratory on the edge of a lake. The apes will live in rooms connected by elevated walkways and doors they can open themselves. They'll have musical instruments, chalk for drawing, an indoor waterfall, a greenhouse filled with bananas and sugarcane. They will have total agency. There's a kitchen where they can cook, vending machines stocked with snacks, and televisions where they can watch their favorite movies. Movies featuring apes and humans working together, like Tarzan or Quest for Fire. It's a bonobo paradise. The bonobos aren't just exposed to language, they're also exploring their world artistically. The lexigram training program uses spoken English, but the lexicograms themselves are drawings. There's something between art and writing. Kanzi and his family have regular access to art supplies. They paint abstract images like human children do, but they also paint lexicograms. Kanzi paints a lexigram of his own name, and it's gorgeous. It has this raw, expressive energy that I love, but more importantly, it means something. It means Kanzi. One day at the lab in Atlanta, Bandini is drawing on the floor with chalk. The attending human is busy with baby Nyota. Bandini waits patiently, but she gets antsy. She walks to the lexigram board and presses the button for A-frames. She wants to go to the A-frame structure in the woods. This gets Nyota's attention. He grabs a piece of chalk and draws the A-frame symbol on the ground. Kanzi sees and draws the symbol 6 times himself. The bonobos have learned how to manipulate the symbol keyboard, but the skill is escaping containment. They are learning how to write. Back in Atlanta in 1990, a new long-term project was beginning. Archaeologists and cognitive scientists have come to the lab to teach Kanzi how to make stone tools. One of the fascinating parallels between humans and apes is that we all use tools. Bonobos and chimps use sticks to fish for termites, sponges to sop up water for drinking, and rocks to crack open nuts. Some chimps even fashion wooden spears to hunt bush babies. But Kanzi's about to learn a much more advanced skill. He's going to learn how to make this. This is an Oldowan chopper, one of the oldest pieces of hominid technology. It's simple by modern standards. To make an Oldowan tool, you strike a round hammerstone against a stone core. Hitting the stone in the right way will chip off sharp flakes, and it will leave a sharp edge on the core. Early hominids would use both parts, the core and the flake, as tools.
Make, rock, knife, proof.
Oh, what a big one. Look at that. That's really perfect.
Over the course of the project, Kanzi has learned to create viable stone tools very similar to this Oldowan chopper, and he immediately puts them to use cutting rope and opening puzzle boxes. He's even devised a new method to increase his striking force. He throws the hammerstone at the core from a distance. It's a huge improvement, and it's entirely from Kanzi's own creativity. Even more surprising, Bandini starts imitating Kanzi and making her own stone tools without any human intervention or training. There is a precedent for this behavior in wild chimpanzees. chimps use a procedure that's very similar to Oldowan tool making to crack open nuts. This process uses a hammerstone and an anvil, a flat surface, to strike against. And a recent study has found that this behavior in wild chimps may be a lot more complex than we thought, with short routines organized into longer sequences of action. Studies of chimpanzee brains have found higher activation on the side of the brain that controls the hand the chimp prefers for tool use. And the brain areas most affected are the same areas that are used for language in humans. Tool use appears to be a sort of pre-adaptation. It prepared us for the motor functions and structures associated with language and speech. Even though chimps are capable of surprisingly complex tool use, wild chimps still can't make their own stone tools like Kanzi can. Their brains may have some of the pre-wiring needed to make tools, but the missing piece of this puzzle may turn out to be culture. Kanzi and Bandini are unenculturated. They were raised among humans and immersed in human language their entire lives. It might be the secret to Kanzi's incredible success. Through the 2000s, Kanzi's fame skyrockets. He makes television appearances and becomes an ambassador for bonobo intelligence. He's become a symbol of the link between humans and apes. The Canadian TV series Champions of the Wild has an episode showing off the incredible skills of bonobos. As the world's most famous bonobo, Kanzi makes an appearance. He sits in front of a console with his hand on a joystick. He's playing Pac-Man, and he's not bad. In 2010, Kanzi appears on an episode of The Oprah Winfrey Show.
Hi, Kanzi.
Lisa Ling visits the lab to see what Kanzi can really do.
Come here.
Kanzi sits with Sue while she holds baby Tico and they talk using the electronic lexigram keyboard. Lisa and Kanzi play with blocks. She says, communicating with Kanzi is kind of like talking to a toddler.
Dr. Sue, how many words does Kanzi know?
We just guess he knows several thousand. On his keyboard, there are about 450 that he can understand.
Anderson Cooper, 60 Minutes, and the BBC all do profiles of the lab and Kanzi's amazing abilities. A year later, Sue makes Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people in the world, alongside Mark Zuckerberg, Michelle Obama, and Aung San Suu Kyi. This is the height of Kanzi's fame and the peak of Sue Savage-Rumbaugh's career. But the good times were coming to an end. It's 2015. The center is under new management. Derek Wildman, the scientist who had mapped Kanzi's genome, describes the $10 million facility as a ghost town. According to Wildman, the culture had completely changed. Sue's innovative familial approach was gone in favor of a more standard research program. Researchers were no longer allowed in the same spaces as the bonobos for their safety and the safety of the animals. The center's new director had aimed to put the bonobo back in the bonobo. Sue is living in a small cottage next to the ape lab in Iowa. There's a wall separating her home from the wooded backlot where the bonobos like to roam. From her cottage, she can hear them playing. Sue hasn't been allowed back into the lab for 2 years.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa is falling apart as the Cedar River swallows the city. It looks more
In 2008, Iowa had been racked by a torrential downpour. Nearly every river in East Iowa flooded, causing $6 billion worth of damage. This is something Kanzi had never experienced. To describe it, he combined two lexigrams: bad water. In the wake of the flood, the lab's funding evaporates.
Right now, the operating budget is 25% of what it used to be.
Politically, it was very difficult.
Townsend rescinds his endowment and the lab is suddenly in real jeopardy. They may have to close their doors for good. There are rumblings that the research center has suffered under Sue's leadership. Sue has a very personal relationship with the apes. She's almost always in the facility in the same rooms with the bonobos in constant physical contact. Kanzi is severely overweight. Sue writes an article advocating for bonobo welfare. She defends some of her more unconventional methods. She cites Kanzi, Bandini, and Inyota as co-authors. She's written the paper with their input using lexicograms to get their reflections on their own well-being. For some primate scientists, this is too far. The primatologist Robert Seyfarth comments that the paper has damaged her credibility.
I think that made people feel that if Sue's going to say this in that kind of a journal, and she's going to put the bonobos on as co-author. Who knows what she might do next?
Email allegations against the chief researcher have raised new doubts about the facility's future.
The email claims Dr. Rumbaugh suffers from behavioral issues like hallucinations and paranoia. That caused her to remove competent employees from the laboratory.
12 former employees file a formal complaint that the center has been severely mismanaged. They accuse Sue of putting the apes at risk of disease and injury and of being mentally unfit to run the lab. The allegations are damning. They say that Sue has at times forgotten where she left the bonobos, locked them outdoors without water for hours at a time, exposed them to people without proper vaccinations or adequate safety measures. Under her supervision, Bandini's son Inyota nearly escapes the facility. To outsiders, this feels more like the haphazard research of the 1950s than a modern primate laboratory. In the middle of all this chaos, Bandini falls ill and dies. Respiratory illness is a common problem for apes living in captivity, but it rings alarm bells in the ape research community. This is a crisis. Sue is investigated and cleared of wrongdoing, but there are concerns that the board may have other motivations. The research center's chairman has emphasized that the only way to raise money is Sue. Her clout is what holds the facility together. In 2013, while working in the lab, Sue collapses and suffers a concussion. She takes a leave of absence from the lab and from Kanzi to get back on her feet. She appoints her former grad student Jared Tagliatella as the new director of the center. 6 months later, Sue comes back to the center. She has no idea that the board has decided she can't return. Sue is completely blindsided as she's ordered off the premises. This is the last time that Sue and Kanzi will ever see each other. Over the years, the dust settles. The new management completely reworks the way the lab is run. Kanzi is put on a more appropriate diet and loses 75 pounds. The research goes on, but with more controls. It's less intimate and more conventional. The new goal? To treat apes as apes. Kanzi and his family still roam the woods and play and communicate, but there's a careful distance now between the researchers and their subjects. Kanzi was the first non-human to acquire at least some limited aspects of language the way humans do, through passive exposure in infancy. Frans de Waal has said that work with Kanzi has always lived somewhere between rigorous science and family life. The Kanzi project is the last of its kind, with humans and apes living and working together as peers. The science has matured. There are still new discoveries coming from Kanzi and his family every day. He continued to participate in experiments right up until he died. And we've learned a lot more about apes in the wild. Natural bonobo communication has turned out to be much more complex than we ever realized. Matata may have failed in the language project, but she was the matriarch of the most unconventional family that ever lived. She raised 8 children and 2 grandchildren in a unique human bonobo culture that will very likely never be replicated. Kanzi's impact on the science of language is deep. His work with Sue Savage-Rumbaugh has been placed in the top 100 most influential works in the history of cognitive science. It's caused us to reevaluate just what it means to be human. Kanzi's grasp of language wasn't perfect, but he came closer than any non-human animal ever had before. In the end, Noam Chomsky was right. Humans are wired for language. But like Jane Goodall says, it's a very wuzzy line that separates us from apes, and it's getting wuzzier all the time.
I can't call them animals. I never call them animals. They are not animals.
Sue Savage-Rumbaugh once said, "We are special because we have the ability to speak." So we put protective boundaries around language because we as a species feel the need to be unique. She said, "I'm not opposed to that. I just happened to find out it wasn't true."